Welcome to Global Movies Recap.
Hello. Today we will recap an erotic thriller movie, in which a hot girl kills a guy while hugging. To know what happens next, and to know the movie name, watch till the end. The movie starts with a mysterious blonde woman hugging a man on his bed. She then stabs him to death with an ice pick during hugging. Homicide detective Nick Curran and his partner Gus Moran are looking into the death of this man, Johnny Boz, a retired rock star. Johnny Boz's bisexual ex-girlfriend Catherine Trammell, a successful and wealthy crime novelist, who was last seen with Johnny the night he died. She is the only lead the detectives have on the murder. Nick and Gus look for Catherine at her Pacific Heights mansion, but they find only Catherine's lesbian lover Roxy. She tells them Catherine is at her Stinson beach house, and mentions, "You're wasting your time. Catherine didn't kill him." Nick and Gus pay a casual visit to the beach house and question Catherine. When they ask questions about her relationship with Johnny, she insists that she wasn't dating him, she was only using him for hugging. Her hot and unpredictable behavior shocked Nick and Gus. Nick, Gus, and other detectives discover that Catherine has written a novel that mirrors the murder of Johnny Boz, tied to the bed with a white scarf and stabbed multiple times with an ice pick. It concludes that whether Catherine is the murderer or someone is attempting to frame her. Nick goes to investigate Catherine in her house. After another confrontation with Nick and Gus, Catherine agrees to go to police headquarters for interrogation. She asks, "Can I change into something more appropriate?" She left her door open and returns wearing a short miniskirt. Catherine behaves uncooperative, taunting, dominant, and provocatively exposing her sweet spot during the investigation. The interrogators and Nick are shocked and uncomfortably aroused. She tells them that she is not a fool, that she would kill someone after writing a novel on the killing scene. Then she also passes the lie detector test. Nick asks her to drop her to home. On the way home, Catherine teases Nick and tries to seduce him. Later that night, Nick resumes drinking at the police bar after having been sober for years. Nick informs Gus and Lieutenant Walker that he still suspects Catherine and expresses his concerns about Catherine's parents' deaths. Gus and Lieutenant Walker joke about Nick's unusual attention to Catherine. Nielsen, an internal affairs officer, arrives and bullies Nick by calling him Shooter, referring to the tourist shootout. Nick and Nielsen get into an argument. Then Nick's psychologist Beth arrives and ends the confrontation. Internal Affairs has required him to see Beth, because he has accidentally shot 2 tourists while high on cocaine during an undercover assignment. She and Nick then leave together. They engage in heated hugging at Beth's apartment, where Nick behaves very aggressively and hugs her. She is very shocked by his behavior and hugging style. Later, Beth reveals that she and Catherine did attend the same classes in college. Although he had stopped smoking for some time, Nick asks for a cigarette, and Beth gives him the cigarette and kicks Nick out. Nick discovers that Catherine's parents were killed in an explosion on their boat when Catherine was a teen. Nick also finds Catherine has a history of befriending murderers. Nick visits Catherine, where she offers him a drink and uses an ice pick to break the ice, same as the murder weapon. Nick discovers that Catherine is basing the protagonist of her latest book on him, wherein his character will get murdered after falling for the wrong woman. Catherine shares some confidential things about Nick with him, that only the psychiatrist Beth ought to know. Then Roxy comes there, and Catherine and Roxy seduce Nick by touching each other. Then Nick ignores them and leaves. When Nick confronts Beth about Catherine's knowledge of his private life, Beth reluctantly informs him that the investigator Nielsen was attempting to get Nick fired from the force. As a result, she felt compelled to provide Nielsen with Nick's private file, so that Nielsen and other investigators could evaluate Nick directly. Nick suspects that Catherine has bribed Nielsen of Internal Affairs for information from Nick's psychiatric file, and he assaults Nielsen in his office, accusing him of showing his psychological profile to Catherine. Later, Nielsen is found dead in his car with a gunshot in the head from a pistol. Other officers assume Nick may have a motive. Officers conduct the same investigation on Nick as they did on Catherine. During the interrogation, Nick is uncooperative, smoking, and insulting, as Catherine earlier. Nick suspects Catherine of murdering Nelson, and when his behavior worsens, he is sent on leave. Nick visits a club and witnesses Catherine dancing with Roxy. Nick and Catherine party and make out on the dance floor. Later, Nick and Catherine have aggressive hugging in her mansion, as Roxy watches without Nick's knowledge. Catherine ties Nick's hands to the headboard with a silk scarf. just as Johnny had tied by the mysterious blonde. But she does not kill Nick. The next morning, Nick tells Catherine that he is in love with her. Later at night, Roxy attempts to kill Nick by running him over with Catherine's car, but she kills herself. Following Roxy's death, Catherine tells Nick about a similar love story she had in college. A girl named Lisa was obsessed with her, just like Roxy. Lisa too attacked people who came close to her, and she suspects she is behind the death of the professor. Now, as Nick starts believing Catherine, this girl named Lisa becomes a suspect. Despite his partner, Moran warns about Catherine's friends who are basically murderers. Nick investigates and discovers that Lisa is Dr. Beth Gardner, who later changed her name, making Nick believe that Catherine may not have killed Johnny. Though on leave, Nick proceeds with his investigation, and discovers Roxy killed her two younger brothers when 16. Nick confronts Beth about keeping away such a big secret from the investigation. But here, Beth has a side of her own. She tells Nick that Catherine was obsessed with her and that she was the one who left Catherine. In turn, she cautions Nick to avoid Catherine. He could be her next prey. She tells him that she changed her name because of her relationship with Catherine. She also warns him that Catherine is very smart and that she is not innocent. Nick discovers that a Beth and Catherine college professor was murdered with an ice pick in an unsolved crime, and that the events correspond to one of Catherine's early novels. Nick finishes Catherine's book, where the fictional detective discovers his partner dead in an elevator. Catherine then ends their affair, which upsets Nick and makes him suspicious. Later, Nick meets Gus, who has arranged to meet with Catherine's college roommate at an office building, hoping to find the real story between Catherine and Beth. As Nick waits in the car, Gus has stabbed to death in the elevator with an ice pick. Recalling the last pages of Catherine's book, Nick runs into the building to find Gus' body as the scene described. Beth shows up at the crime scene and explains that she received a message to meet Gus. Nick suspects Beth has murdered Gus, and believing that she is reaching for a gun, he shoots her. But discovers that Beth was only fingering an ornament on her keychain. As she dies, she tells Nick she loves him. Police investigate and finds that someone called Gus for a meeting in the building. Police also search Beth's apartment, and evidence gathered in Beth's apartment implicates her as the killer of Johnny, Nielsen, Gus, and her husband, along with collections of photos, a .38 revolver, copies of Catherine's books, an ice pick, and newspaper cuttings of Catherine that imply Beth's obsession with her. Later, Nick returns to his apartment, confused, and we see Catherine visiting Nick at home, telling him that she can't love him because whoever she loves dies. She explains her reluctance to commit to Nick. Moments later, Nick and Catherine casually lay on the bed. As Nick talks about things they could do in love, like family and all, until Nick scraps those plans and tells her, "Let's just have fun." Catherine slowly reaches under the bed for something, but then changes her mind and returns to romantic love with Nick. The camera slowly pans down and exposes the bed's underside, where an ice pick is lying on the floor, revealing Catherine as the mysterious blonde killer all along. So basically, Catherine was the murderer, but she was clever enough to blame it all on Beth. All of this was because when she was in a relationship with Beth in college, Beth abandoned her, believing Catherine was psycho. All of this was for the same revenge, and Nick and the cops were the fools. So she worked in a similar manner to the stories from her novels. If that is to believe, she murdered both the professor and her parents, especially since one of her books depicted a child murdering her own parents.
Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. I'll be back with another interesting movie recap. Until then, take care.